Hello and welcome back to the Near Futurist, the podcast I've been running for almost 5 years now. We cover both the business and consumer worlds, and as always, I'll welcome feedback and input on the LinkedIn page. Just search for Guy Clapperton and Near Futurist and you won't have any trouble finding it. Before I introduce this month's guest though, here's a word from my sponsor. Well, not so much a sponsor as me pitching my media training operation. Or your clients want to sound as confident, clear and fluent in media interviews as the people in this podcast? Of course you do. My team and I can help. Drop my assistant Lindsay, that's lindsay@clapperton.co.uk, a note and she'll set us a time for an initial chat. Or go to the website at clapperton.co.uk, 2 Ps, to find out more. Now, back to the podcast. But you're not here from the self-publicity. What you need to hear from is the guest. Now, waste management is an industrial problem. We all know that really, and we're consuming far too much stuff. But when the economy is tight, we tend to take the easy way out. Disposing of waste is an industry, and according to my guest, one way to handle that industry is through software. His company is IBC Global, and it aims to drive the circular economy and works towards reductions in greenhouse gas emissions. It does this by providing what it believes is the most advanced waste management and recycling software globally. It integrates, automates and simplifies to drive greater operational efficiency, productivity and profitability for organizations that operate in the waste, recycling, clean energy and environmental sector. Creating clean, efficient operations that contribute positively to the environment and circular economy is what the company aims to do. The chief executive is with me. His name is Chris Williams. Chris, welcome.
Thank you very much, Guy. Nice to be here.
Great stuff. Well, let's start with the basics. There's more recycling and less frequent rubbish collection than there ever has been during my lifetime. Maybe that's just a Croydon thing. But what are the existing problems with waste at the moment? It feels as if we've taken several steps forward since I was a child.
Yeah, look, Guy, quite frankly, you mentioned it before, there is just too much of it. And most of us are just not aware of the consequences of the volume of waste we're creating. And I think there's a couple of reasons for that. Firstly, there's really not enough recycling, there's not enough repurposing, there's not a reuse of the materials we're throwing away. And what the impact of that is too much going to landfill. And landfill has devastating effects on the environment. And if we think about the current crisis in terms of climate change, most people are not aware that landfill contributes some 11% of total methane gas emissions. And methane gas is an incredibly bad greenhouse gas, some 80% more warming than normal carbon dioxide. So waste going into landfill is a very big problem. The other issues with creating too much waste and sending it to landfill is, of course, we are burying billions of dollars, billions of pounds of valuable and what is very finite material. Now, when you think about it, it's almost nonsensical that we're burying this material because we are going to run out. And I think the final thing to note on the issues of too much waste, the issues of landfilling, is that we're seeing a lot of material in landfill now leaking poisons into our water supplies, into our oceans. And a lot of the landfills, and you've seen very recently, are starting to be exposed. In fact, a recent article on the television here with coastal erosion around the north and south coast is starting to expose a lot of landfills, and a lot of that material is now flowing back into the ocean and poisoning our beaches and our seas. So a lot of problems with waste at the moment, Guy.
You're saying our oceans. This, of course, goes all the way around the world, all the 11 listeners. I'm just wondering, are you talking about the UK? Are you based in the UK indeed?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's a problem globally. We have created the excess waste. Our propensity to bury the stuff in the hole in the ground has created hundreds of thousands of landfills, hundreds of thousands of dumps around the world. We don't know where those are. And those, as I say, those dumps are starting to leach poisons. They're starting to erode back into our water supplies and our oceans. So, pretty bad news when it comes to the excessive waste we've produced.
Water can be purified, things can be cleaned. I mean, that sounds like a lot of use of energy to me. I'm almost answering my own question in my head as I ask it. But Where could this actually lead if it's not halted or at least better managed?
A lot of the new landfills, of course, are engineered, and what I mean by that is they have filtration units, they have linings, and so forth, and that really protects some of the stuff we're throwing away. But it goes back to the point we are creating too much of it, and in fact, the drive has to be to create less waste, right? Less consumerism and less waste produced.
It's almost as if having a new mobile phone every 2 years was a bad idea. But getting back to the more sort of at scale issues, we've been aware of this for some time. Your contribution is to put some sort of software solution forward. Tell us about that. How does that help?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, you mentioned it earlier on in the piece, and what has been a real driver for our organisation, for our company, is, as you mentioned, the circular economy. I think what we've all done for the last many years has been living very much a linear model or a linear economy. And what that really means is we mine the material, we use the product, and we throw it away, right? And we just know, as we've said before, that is it's not sustaining. Firstly, we haven't got enough materials. We've got a finite source of materials, and what we're throwing away is creating an incredible amount of greenhouse gases and also poisoning our water supplies and our planet. So WR1 really, or our product waste and recycling one, is there to track, I would say, the molecule around that circular economy. And that means that we are, right from the collection or the production of waste, we are tracking it such that ultimately it will not end up in a landfill. So we want to send materials to recycling plant to be remanufactured, to be reproduced. And ideally, we want to educate you and me, of course, Guy, you mentioned to use things a little bit longer, to fix things where we break down. Again, back to this point of we are creating too much of it. Let's start by, in fact, creating less of it. What we're quite proud of in terms of our software is that we are driving a lot of operational efficiencies for our customers. We have a single integrated software solution rather than lots and lots of point solutions that a lot of the listeners will be familiar with. And that means that if our customers are profitable, then they can continue or invest in recycling facilities and reprocessing facilities. So as they collect the material, instead of that material ending up in their landfills, indeed it goes into their reprocessing plants. And these plants cost millions and millions of dollars, millions of pounds, of course, to build. So the more profitable, the more operational efficient we can make our customers, the more they'll continue to invest. So pretty proud of what we've done over the years, and a very, very important vision for us as an organisation to effectively send less to landfill.
This sounds like a very major, big project. I'd be interested to know whether or not you can name them, what the type of customers you actually have, and the extent to which, how much of the supply chain you cover overall. Because the thing about a circular economy is that covers an awful lot of ground. In
terms of a couple of projects that we're busy with at the moment, Guy, in North America, one is a company called Rumpke of Ohio, and the other is Waste Pro USA, and those are large waste hauliers, running large vehicle fleets. And dealing with millions of municipal or residential and commercial customers, and WR1 really covers and all the waste streams that you'll see in the sector, both as I say, municipal waste, commercial waste, hazardous waste, food waste, and the list goes on. So we're not too worried about the material we're collecting. What is important for us is we ensure that if there's a ton of plastic collected, that ton of plastics gets back to a drinks bottling plant to make plastic bottles again, and round the supply chain that material goes. So we're not so worried about the type of material, but certainly we're looking to track that molecule, track that material around that circular model, Guy.
Now, once again, I'm interrupting the main item to bring you my new section where I have a look at a gadget I've been using lately. I decided to upgrade my note-taking a while ago and started off with a LiveScribe pen and a notebook, which was great. You need a special notebook and a pen and its app. Transfer all of the notes over to the device of your choice, phone, tablet, whatever. This is a good, if costly, way of doing things, but I wanted to try and use less paper. So, a friend gave me a Rocket book. Thank you, Jackie. This is basically a wipe clean notebook as long as you use their pens. I've ruined a couple of pages that way, with an app that allows you to scan your notes into the cloud again so you don't risk losing them, and the fact that you're wiping it clean saves on paper consumption. I was happy with this for quite some time. My current solution is the Remarkable 2. This is basically a stripped-down tablet and has an appealing paper-like feel. You can also read and make notes on PDFs on it. It's not cheap, but it looks slick, and I use it to keep a note of schedules of events I'm hosting. People do comment on it, which is nice. Its drawback is that it starts every new document as a new notebook rather than a document, which in turn means you can't import directly into Evernote or OneNote because to those, a new document is a document, not a notebook, and a notebook is a collection of documents. There are workarounds, but it's just a bit of a mismatch. Also, if I'd been buying a year later, I would probably have had a look at Amazon's Kindle Scribe, as it's slightly cheaper, and as the name suggests, you can read Kindle books on it as well. I haven't played with that as yet, but it sounds as if it addresses a major gap in the Remarkable, at least as far as what I was looking for is concerned. Also, I haven't yet played with those paper-like covers you can get for a standard tablet, which would of course mean being able to use something I've already bought. Anyway, that's this month's product set. Now, back to the podcast. Okay, so what else has to happen to make this whole system become sustainable? How can, say, individuals and companies continue to make a difference, even before their products reach the recycling facilities or reach the bin, if you like?
That's right. No, again, and it's another good point, and I think it comes back to the circular economy. And some listeners may have come across what's called the waste hierarchy. And the waste hierarchy was really where we start at the top, and in fact, let's produce less, and it ends at the bottom, hopefully with a lot less going into landfill. So, I think what a lot of manufacturers need to be tasked with is actually producing their goods, manufacturing the goods with materials that can be recycled, and that's really half the battle. And I think we've probably seen more recently on the news over the last couple of weeks is they're now worried about the millions or billions of solar panels that will be now end of life. We know they've got a 25-year lifespan. And in fact, after that 25 years, which is obviously starting to come about over the next five or 10 years, what are we going to do with them? And likewise, there's been some headlines for the likes of windmill blades. The composites that go into a windmill blade are very hard to recycle. And in fact, windmills tend to sit in very hard to reach places, and the thought of taking down a windmill blade and shipping it some 200 miles, to be cut up and reprocessed again is a very, very expensive task. And these things often get buried in the ground. So I think, Guy, you make a very good point here that the compounds we are producing, the materials we're producing, we need to be thinking of how we can recycle those materials at manufacture. And I think that's the first step in this process.
Isn't there also an issue? You mentioned the idea of these windmill blades being shipped 200 miles or something. I'm just thinking aloud here. That shipping is going to take an awful lot of power. It's going to take an awful lot of gasoline. It's going to take an awful lot of electricity. It's a resource-intensive thing. Does your software, or are there systems out there to calculate, to offset all these things so that you don't end up with the best possible intentions, using up more resources on trying to rescue a particular resource than you're rescuing in the first place?
It's quite true that there is some business benefits, a business case that needs to be established. And we're not sitting here saying these renewable energy sources are bad. Of course, it's more about understanding and calculating the total carbon consumption, not only in what is saved, of course, by using more renewable energy sources, but what goes into the manufacture and the construction of these windmills with concrete towers and steel towers, concrete bases and fiberglass blades, etc. Certainly, our software is there to help calculate the costs of that disposal, including all those elements. And often this is what leads to these materials ending up in landfill, because all those costs contributed, as you mentioned, it's the disassembly, it's the transport, it's the freight, and finding someone that actually knows how to recycle those complex composites is often cost prohibitive, and that's why we we're seeing such a continued growth in landfill.
And where do you see this market, this environment, however you want to describe it, going over the next 5 years or so? Are we going to improve?
There's some really positive things, and I think we need to always, keep a positive view in terms of how the market is responding and dealing with, the requirements of waste. I think there's also a couple of downsides. We clearly need legislation to help, manage and dictate how organisations deal with waste materials. The UK has been a leading light in terms of the Environmental Act of 2021, in terms of lots of legislation in there around how to deal with waste materials. You might have come across the Conference of Parties. They call them COPs or COPs. They run one of the very few global parties or conferences that run every year, and I think COP28 is coming up this year in Dubai. But the key directive of the Conference of Parties is to think back to that Paris Agreement, where we're trying to limit global warming to no more than 1.5 degrees. And what we're seeing finally out of those Conference of Parties is some recognition of poor waste management practices, which has been largely overlooked over the last couple of years, guys. So that's really good from my perspective. And also, not to be outdone, we hear some talk of the Inflation Reduction Act, which is being passed by Joe Biden in the US last year. And that is also putting some $400 billion towards sustainability and more carbon-friendly activity. So all good news. And I think the other thing, as I mentioned, we need more investment in recycling and reprocessing plants. We know this takes time and it has to start now. We create waste. Unfortunately, there is a lot of waste that is still going to landfill. What is the alternative? Let's recycle it, and let's recycle our plastics, our paper, our metals, etc. And I think the final thing to note, just in terms of the next few years, we've seen some interesting technology around waste to energy. And again, it's been in the headlines more recently, perhaps related to the fire up of a lot of these coal-fired power stations as a result of the energy crisis. They've worked out, in fact, that they can put waste into these coal-fired power stations and get quite a lot of, or high output as well. So instead of finally putting stuff into the ground, the waste to energy is not a bad alternative. Now, there are disadvantages of that, of course, because the output of burning waste, there's still some toxic materials, toxic gases, and we are burning a valuable commodity, of course. So we're seeing, as I say, we're seeing a good move around legislation. We're also seeing a lot of in-country environmental agencies taking their stand and enforcing things like fly tipping, enforcing things like making producers more responsible for the products they're producing, more education programs, providing you and I with better facilities at our households for bins, for segregation of waste, and so forth. So some positives there, Guy, now and coming up in the future.
Okay, finally, where can people find out more about yourself and ISB Global?
We're all really passionate about the sector, around the industry. Absolutely. We've got a great product, a great bit of software to help manage that circular economy, to manage those supply chains. So please, come to our website, isbglobal.com, have a look at our thought leadership on our blogs. We've got lots of posts on LinkedIn. And also we have a software showcase site as well, which gives a great view in terms of all the functions and activities of our software that's there and can be viewed and experienced.
Chris Williams, Chief Executive of ISB Global, thank you very much for being my guest.
Very good. Thank you very much, Guy.
And of course, thank you for listening. This has been The Near Futurist, a Clapperton media production, and I've been Guy Clapperton. See you in a month.